the minerals, the natural resources are owned by the federal government. I think that should change. The oil in Alaska belongs to Alaska. It doesn't belong to Washington. We in Nigeria and in Africa should stop using the excuse or blaming the West for our failures.
Don't worry about the high exchange rates.
Yes.
Worry about producing.
Worry about having light, electricity 24 hours a day in Nigeria. Worry about moving from 4,000 megawatts to 40,000 megawatts. So the Naira exchange rate is not the problem with Nigeria. It is a reflection of the problem with Nigeria.
Okay. First of all, Prof, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so grateful.
You're very welcome.
I really look forward to meeting you, and I know a lot of young people who want to hear what you have to say. You've inspired so many people of my age, my generation. I began following you when you, I would say after your tenure as Deputy Governor of CBN, your foray into politics, the way you spoke, your passion, your virtue, in the midst of mediocrity, you seem to stand out. You know, everything you said kind of resonated, and so I'm really keen on hearing what you have to say today.
Yeah.
I want to take you back to your childhood, Prof. How was growing up like for you? What's growing up in Nigeria? I think Enugu State.
Yeah.
How was it like, sir?
Well, growing up actually began outside the country. When I was born in 1963, my father was a foreign service officer in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, then in Lagos. Shortly after I was born, he was posted to Geneva in Switzerland.
Yes.
And then I joined him a few weeks later with my mother. So my early childhood was spent first year in Switzerland, the next 3 years in Washington, D.C., where he was also posted after Switzerland. Then the Civil War came. We returned to the country before the war was declared.
Yes.
So my father transferred back to the Eastern Region Civil Service. And so we returned, I think, around March or April 1967. And it was shortly after, a month or two later, that the Eastern Region declared that it was seceding from Nigeria. So my early childhood was also a childhood of war and what all that came with. Now, obviously, as a child, I didn't have too much awareness of the big geopolitical currents that was going on, but I knew there was a war. It affected us in so many ways, including the death of my uncle, my father's younger brother, who was a soldier in the Biafran army at the time. So when I came back home, and then the Civil War, we lived in Enugu for a little while, then we moved to Nnewi, our hometown. And at some point, we also lived in Umuahia, which was one of the capitals, one of the makeshift capitals of Biafra at the time. So I learned how to speak Igbo very well. And I remember the discussions of adults always talking about the war. I kept remembering mention of the name Gowon, Gowon. You keep hearing Gowon. And then you'll be hearing Vandals. Now, on the other side of the war, they were referring to our part of the country as the rebels.
Oh.
So it was the rebels versus the Vandals, quote unquote. I mean, those are the names at the time. Now, of course, later on, Gowon and I became very good friends. And so we've had the opportunities to talk a lot about this. And some of, his regrets as well. And so, after the Civil War, I grew up then in Enugu mostly, and then Aba, because my father remained down in the East Central State Civil Service. He did not return to the Foreign Service. So we now had a normal childhood at home, and it was a happy time, very happy time. My parents were civil servants. My mother was a dietitian. So she brought us up quite strictly. She was very strict. My mother was a real disciplinarian. And, I am forever grateful for that. Our father as well. He was also, he set up a lot of values for us, and we were very proud to be his children. We grew up with a sense of pride in bearing his name. And that really has followed me all through my life, because a lot of times, especially in the Eastern region and even sometimes in the federal system, for people of his generation, who knew him, when they know that you're his son, it has attracted a lot of goodwill.
Yes.
And very positive reactions, So, and I also grew up then also wanting to be like him in terms of having a good and very positive legacy.
Yes.
Yes. So that's really, my childhood was quite a very happy childhood, I must say. Yes.
I'm happy
I was the
because-
first of, I am the first of 5 children. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I
Yeah.
mean, you mentioned the values your parents instilled in you.
Yes.
Which is obvious. I mean, from you being a professor, the kind of things you talk about, how eloquent you speak, and the values you always preach whenever you give your public speeches. I listened to a bit of your speech at the leadership conference a few weeks ago in Lagos.
Yes, in Abuja.
Sorry, in Abuja. Sorry,
Yeah.
incredible. It was amazing.
Thank you.
But just going back to what you mentioned about the Civil War.
Yes.
I mean, I know you were 3 or 4 years old, so you might not remember much.
Yes.
But what stood out to you?
I was
from
4 years when the war started.
Okay.
Yeah, and
from-
7 when it
yes,
ended.
From
Yeah.
your recollections about the Civil War, what stood out to you? And when you compare it to today, when you see, I you and I, so
Yes.
we're from the East.
Yes.
When you see some people still talking about Biafra,
Yes.
does it make you afraid? Does it make you scared? Does it make you think back to your experience? You mentioned your uncle who sadly passed away.
Yes.
What do you think? How do you think we should approach this
Yes.
topic of Biafra?
The matter of Biafra is the matter of the war. What led to the war and what the war represented in terms of what happened, the millions of lives that were lost, and the attempt at secession, which was of course unsuccessful. The return or the recombination of Nigeria as it originally was after the Civil War, with the East now back in the fold. So let me first of all start with another recollection about the war that was not political at all, and that was eating and frying crickets and grasshoppers. Very succulent, delicious. Oh my God, so tasty.
Yes.
So I remember those
Yeah,
things
yeah.
as a child,
Yeah.
because there wasn't that much food,
Yes.
and so people made do with a lot of things, but more seriously, the war represented a breakdown of shall we say, a negotiated solution to a dispute between 2 different parts of the country. The Eastern region, which included not just the Igbos, I want to remind you, but several other minority ethnic groups in the Eastern region. We have to go back to the coup, the first coup, which Nzogu led, and which killed a lot of political leaders. And, by some happenstance, some would think it was calculated, but I don't think it was. It was a botched execution of the coup that led to the reality that no major, politician of the Igbo group was killed, but several leaders from other ethnic groups were.
Mostly from the north as well.
Mostly from the north,
Yes.
but also from the southwest, Akintola. Then, of course, even from the Midwest, Okotiebo, I think. Yes. So we have to also, especially for those of us from the southeast, not forget this beginning. It's very convenient to think about our own losses and those of us who lost their lives, but we also have to consider the other side, quote unquote, at that time as well. Now, because of that botched execution of the coup, it looked like an Igbo coup, but it was not intended, as far as I know. I've researched this topic very well. Even read the book by Ademulegu, who is not Igbo, who was one of the, Adeboyega, sorry. Yeah, yes. Adeboyega, who was one of the 5 majors, who planned the coup. But the negotiations broke down. One of the reasons it broke down is because the agreement at Aburi, and I have discussed this with Godwin, and I have put it to him, that the reason the Civil War happened is because the agreements that were reached between him and Ojukwu at Aburi in Ghana were not followed.
Yes.
So hence the East at the time were saying, on Aburi we stand. That was the slogan, because there were some agreements that were reached about how to reconfigure the country and all that, that if they had been kept, there would not have been a civil war, quite clear. Many people conveniently and mischievously make it look as if some people were set, hell-bent on seceding, but they forget the rest of the story. Thousands and thousands of Easterners, especially Igbos, were killed in a pogrom in the north.
Yes, that's
and that led to a humanitarian crisis. So people ran away from that part of the country back to the east, and it looked as if the lives of people from that part of the country were no longer secure in the federation. So the military governor at the time, Odumegwu Ojukwu, felt a sense of responsibility to protect them. And so in all this, a lot of disputes, a lot of acrimony, recriminations, and the big brother, General Ankara in Ghana, invited Godwin and Ojukwu to Aburi. And there, a lot of discussions and negotiations, and everything was fine. When they came back, it wasn't what was agreed that happened. That's a very important proximate cause of the Civil War. And it is false history when people ignore this fact, So that's concerning the war itself. Of course, we know about 2 million lives were lost, mostly on the Biafran side, and all of that. So it was a tragedy, really, of huge proportions for the whole country, but particularly for the eastern part of the country, which was the theater of the war. A lot of destruction, a lot of families, and a breakdown of social values that now became evident after the Civil War and created some dysfunction in the society. Now, why are people going back to this Biafra idea? It is because in their mind, the war is not over. There is a perception, and some people would argue a reality, that the Igbos have been politically marginalized since the war. And that sense of injustice, that sense of exclusion, now led some young people to begin to resuscitate this idea of Biafra and separatism and secession. Now, I do not believe that the Southeast should secede from Nigeria. I do not. Because if you could not achieve it when the country was in clear regions, it's almost impossible,
of course,
to do that now when there's been so much more integration.
Yes.
That's number one. Number two is that I do believe that even though Nigeria was a forced marriage, between the Northern Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate, for the, pecuniary interest of the colonial masters.
Of course, yes.
Yes, basically
1914.
1914 amalgamation.
Yes.
They were running losses, fiscal losses in the north, and they were running fiscal surpluses in the south. And they decided to bring the two together, to use the fiscal surpluses from the south to subsidize the fiscal losses they were running in the north. That was a major reason for the amalgamation.
Yes.
You see? But we are one country. Never mind the region, the reason, and the rhyme, for that. So we can make it work. And I believe that, what we should focus on is how to reconfigure the country to make it a workable federation. Because the unitary government, whereby all the powers are in the federal capital, and then some people are are feeling excluded because they are not part of those governments in terms of being the president, ever. They have never had that opportunity. Yes. Nnamdi Azikiwe was the ceremonial president in the 60s, but Tafawa Balewa was the prime minister and the head of government. So in that sense, there's one of the three major building blocks of Nigeria. That is the North, Hausa, Fulani, and other minorities, the Yorubas, and the Igbos.
Yes.
That has never had the opportunity to be president.
Yes.
Even the minorities from the East have had that opportunity. Goodluck Jonathan was. And so some people mischievously ascribe Igbo-ness to him. But Jonathan was not Igbo. Ebele Jonathan
No,
is
not.
a short form of Ebelemi, and Ebelemi is not an Igbo name. You know, so this is what what I would say. So those who romanticize Biafra were children during the war or did not see the war. Anybody who saw and understood the horrors of that war would not want a repeat of that, you know, because it's too heavy a price to pay, in my own view. Yes. That's just my own view. It doesn't mean that the people who are agitating don't have a good reason for agitating. There is injustice. There is exclusion. That's obvious. I was even speaking just a few days ago with one of the ministers in this country, who is not Igbo, you know, and he told me quite clearly that the reason for IPOB is because of oppression and injustice against Igbos. Yeah. So even people who and that for us to solve that problem, we have to find a way to negotiate it. It's not a problem you can solve with a
Violence,
gun.
Yes.
It's not. And that's the mistake the Nigerian state and its leaders are making. They do not seem to have a lot of experience or knowledge or will about how to truly build a nation. You see? And that's what needs to happen. It's not that it's an impossible problem to solve, but for some people, it becomes a case of just giving a dog a bad name in order to hang it. Yeah. It becomes a convenient excuse to continue negative attitudes towards a part of the country. They are not the first people who wanted to secede from Nigeria. The first attempt or threat of secession from Nigeria came from the north. And it's called Araba. So history in this country is being twisted to give the wrong impression and to make some people villains and to make some people heroes. But life is a little bit more complicated than that.
Much more nuanced.
Much more nuanced. Yes. Even in the formation of the constitutions during the colonial era, Obafemi Awolowo wanted the right of secession to be included in the constitution. It was Nnamdi Azikiwe who opposed it.
Wow.
So, you know, these are facts.
Yes.
Yes. So I would say that, you know, the effort to reestablish quote unquote Biafra, it's not something, in my own view, that is achievable. You know, certainly not at this time.
Yes.
You know, but I think it's born out of a feeling of grievance. And we need to address the roots of that feeling of grievance. If you solve it, you've solved the Biafra problem. Yes. If you solve it, you've solved the IPOB problem. Yes. After all, there was OPC, the Odua People's Congress, which came out of the June 12 in the 90s. The Yorubas were protesting against the Federation, and they wanted a breakaway. When Obasanjo became president, who was one of their own from that part of the country, well, eventually the matter was settled through negotiations and discussions. You see, so what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That's all I'm saying.
No, I definitely agree to everything you said, sir.
Sure.
One of the things you mentioned in what you said is about rejigging Nigeria and trying to restructure Nigeria.
Absolutely.
And when I was looking into you, that was 2 years ago, I was listening to some of your speeches. I was like, you definitely must have written a book, I told myself.
Yeah.
So I went on Amazon and obviously I came across Imagine Africa.
Okay.
Incredible book.
Well,
and what was going through my mind before I came across your book is I had these ideas in my head, right? Like, why is Nigeria lagging behind when compared to the West?
Exactly. Or even when compared to Asia.
Do we have to go back to the regional structure, the North, the East and the South, or do we have to rewrite the constitution of Nigeria to make it workable? Like, what do we do?
First, let me tell you what we need to do and what we need to do lawfully, what we need to do that is lawful. I think we need a new constitution for Nigeria. It's not about tweaking the current constitution, although that is one path. You know, you should never be absolute.
Of course.
You know, there are different points of view on this matter. Some people believe that if we amend the Constitution enough, we will get to where we need to be. And they cite the US and the 27 constitutional amendments and all those kinds of things. But the Constitution of the United States was far more of a people's constitution, made by some very wise men who were representing the American people.
Alexander Hamilton.
Hamilton,
yes,
George Washington,
yes,
Thomas Jefferson,
of course.
John Jay.
I think that was one of the things I encountered. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
Yes.
Like when thinking about those who wrote our own constitution
Yes.
and those who wrote the American constitution,
Yes.
the difference is obvious that these guys really love their country.
The 1999 Constitution was really a creation of the military. Yeah. It's not, in my own view, even the 1979 Constitution was more representative,
yes,
because there was a constituent assembly that was, elected and, all those kinds of things. So I think that we need to go back to the fundamentals. There are many ethnic groups in Nigeria. There are many disparate religious tendencies. We need to accept the reality that we are not a natural nation, but we can become a philosophical nation, in the sense that we can get ourselves to agree on a common destiny, a common ambition for us all that works for our own good, and agree on how to manage our differences. Diversity is not a curse. America is a very diverse nation,
100%.
and that's an example that where diversity has not stopped the country from, in fact, they used it as a tool,
of course,
to develop themselves. I think it's possible to do that in Nigeria, but for that to happen, we need a new constitution in which there is, one, an agreement on a vision, two, a constitution that all the ethnic nationalities have participated in, and they can see themselves represented in it, and the assurances of their future in this construct. Nobody should be made to feel that they're in this union by force, or, that they'd rather not be here, but they're keeping us here because of their so-called constitution. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
So, because that doesn't make for good nation building. Of course, yes. Doesn't make for good economy as well. So,
I mean, what you're saying is very important, and one of the things that baffles me is how come our leaders know what you're saying is true? Everyone knows that this current thing called Nigeria, this current experiment is not working. It's so obvious, it's not working. So why are they lackadaisical, and why are they slow to recognize it?
Even in my speech in leadership at the leadership conference, I said that the first foundation for our economic dysfunction in this country is the absence of nationhood. There is no sense of nation.
Yes.
We have a country, but we don't have a nation.
Of course. Yes.
So that's why, when you have a nation in which everybody can agree, or most people can agree on where we're going and how to get there, and what the economic path is to create wealth for 200 million people and create opportunities for them, then you have the chance for economic transformation and economic success big time. So that's why I keep coming back to the matter of the Constitution and the inclusiveness that should accompany its creation. Chile is going through the same process, even though they have diversified their economy from reliance on copper to an industrial manufacturing export economy, an emerging market. And they're very much into salmons, they're very much into wines, they're into a lot of things now. But yet, the very foundations of their nation, they're still negotiating it. But in Nigeria, you have a lot of ostriches who bury their head in the sand and think that if you discuss a renegotiation of the construct, it is equivalent to dismantling it. No, it's not. In fact, it is an essential requirement to strengthening it. That would be my argument.
Yeah.
So, but it serves their purposes, for things to remain this way, because some parts of the construct have political dominance. Yeah. But that political dominance does not serve the citizens. It serves only a small elite class.
Yes.
So it's selfishness. You were asking me why. They know, but why? Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that so many parts of the country now, the Southwest, the Southeast, the South-South, even the North Central, are all agitating for what we call a restructuring. That's just a label. You can call it a redesign. Yes. You can call it a reconfiguration. You can call it anything you want. So the fact of the matter, and even now in the North, many people are beginning to say, we really have nothing to fear about this whole question of restructuring. Let's just go to the table and negotiate this thing. Of course, that one of the reasons as well why people know what I'm telling you but have turned their face the other way is economic. And that is the oil rents. Those who control it do not want for any part of the country not to benefit maximally from those rents. So the whole politics and the economy of the country is what we now call a gatekeeper state. Yes. And the oil is the gate, and those who control power control the gate. And then they get the rents, the economic rents. So, and then the federal government gets 52% of those economic rents and distributes the rest between the states and the local governments. Those who control the federal government control the 52%. So if you now say, let's change the game, their vested interest is affected. But I think there are loud enough voices now. I believe that the reconfiguration of Nigeria constitutionally and foundationally is inevitable. Yes. It's just a matter of time, but it will happen.
I definitely agree, sir. You mentioned economic transformation in your book, and you just mentioned it as well now. And one of the things I believe, apart from rejigging Nigeria and trying to reconstruct Nigeria, is also the fact that, like you said, you need technocrats who can run the country. I think you said there are 3 foundational questions we need to solve in page 344 again. Because the book is just an amazing book, and I can't wait to even devour it more with you.
Yeah.
But it's also the fact that we need to spend as well to solve Nigeria.
Oh, sure.
And one of the things that I've always tried to discuss in my head is, why is it that our leaders are not spending more in the country? Because it's obvious that we need to spend our way out of this. That's what I feel anyway, infrastructure-wise.
Okay.
We need to spend on building roads, the best road network like you have in Germany, like you have in the UK. We need to have a version of an autobahn in Nigeria, like autobahn in Germany.
But the first thing we need to spend on, we are not spending on, education.
Exactly. Build the best universities, the best, pay our lecturers more.
Yes. You have to invest first in those things. If you just ignore those things and you go and build all the roads, there will not be the basic human capital to take advantage of those things to create wealth. I'm not saying, of course, that you should not build roads.
Of course,
we have to. But, there has to be a balance. And when you now look at a sense of priorities, human development must be the first investment we need to make. That's how China was able to transform. Many people do not know this, but in the 50s and 60s, China invested so massively in education, and in the 70s. They were very poor, but they kept spending on education. Now, with the base of skills and knowledge in the economy, when they decided to change the economic model to encourage wealth creation and productivity, the country was already operating on a solid foundation. So the foundation must first be built. We had that. We were building it in the 40s, 50s, 60s, but in recent times, educational standards have gone quite low. And we need to go back even to interrogate the concept of education and what it means. Does it mean just getting a degree and wearing a suit? Or does it mean having skills and productive knowledge, PK, as we call it? That's what builds the wealth of nations. What is it that can enable people to invent things, to engineer things, to create more efficient production systems in industries? Those are the things.
100%.
Yes, those are the things that matter very much. And I don't see enough of an investment in that.
I agree, because I remember listening to...
There is a very strong interest in the roads because you award big contracts and some people get kickbacks.
Of course.
And make money. So... you can understand that there's also a perverse incentive to have the priorities out of queue.
No, I definitely agree, because I remember listening to Tim Cook, and he was talking of there's been this push to move manufacturing from China to US.
Yes.
And one of his arguments, not really against it, but kind of against it, is that the knowledge base of building the iPhone or the iPad is in China. So that knowledge, that coding, that whatever to build that iPhone is over there in China. So like you said, the country, they know that this is how the future is going to be. They invested massively.
And they're prepared for it.
Exactly. But for me, like, look at why again, going back to this, is the mediocrity. The fact that our leaders, they send their kids abroad to study. They go abroad for medical treatments. They want the best for themselves. For some reason, they can't bring the best to Nigeria. And the reason why I talk about roads is whenever I come to I'm based in the East mostly, but whenever I love coming to Abuja, because the roads in Abuja are beautiful. Like, it reminds me of being in the UK or being in the West, where you can just do 120. I'm not saying anybody should do it, but you can go as fast as you can. You can't do that. You can't do it in Enugu or in Anambra.
That's
you can't. The roads are so bad.
You asked me a question about whether we should go back to the regions. I didn't answer that question, but let me answer. I believe that ideally we should. Not to the divisions of 1960s, but we can have either 6 geopolitical zones, as they are now, or 12 regions. 6 or 12, 6 or 8 or 10 or 12, doesn't matter. But the reason why that is the preferred way is because it creates economies of scale within each region. If you look at state by state, there are some states that are not as viable as some others.
That's true. Yes.
You know, at least at this time. So I think the regional approach to me makes sense because that's how most federal governments are structured, except the United States, which created states. 48 states, then eventually they became 50. But there was the 13 original states of the Commonwealth, which is New England mostly, and, some parts of eastern United States. And even there is an informal geography of Southwest, the Southeast. Southwest is Dallas, Texas, and Southeast is at Georgia. Then the West is California, Colorado. Then the East is New York. Northeast. So you still have those things. But I think that a regional approach would serve Nigeria very well. That's what I think. Yeah, that's what I think.
No, I definitely agree because I think it's much easier. When I tried, one of the things I did.
But I must say that given the fact of states and governors and all that goes with it, there's a vested interest against a regional approach. And so if you're not able to achieve the very best, you can go with the next best, which is to still devolve power to the states.
Well, it has to be the case because when I look at America and compare America to Nigeria, which is both are federal systems of government, America and Nigeria, I always ask myself, why is it that in Nigeria you have this power being vested only in the federal government? Like, it's just too much power in the federal government. Everyone wants to go to Abuja.
Everyone wants to go to Abuja. Meanwhile, Abuja is too far from a lot of people. And so when Abuja fails, they cannot hold Abuja to account.
Of course.
Because they're too far from Abuja.
Exactly.
But when you bring the responsibility down, closer, they can go to Enugu, they can go to Kaduna, they can go to Ibadan, they can go to Lagos and hold the people who are responsible more accountable. It will take some time still. El Dorado will not be achieved simply because we restructure the country. But it provides the basis for real progress. Now, let me give you a small story. In the United States, I stay in Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. And so I was invited to the swearing in of the newly elected Loudoun County Supervisory Council, which is basically the local government council, and the school's board, which is elected. This ceremony opened my eyes hugely. First of all, the budget for Loudoun County is about $4 billion. Wow. Just one local government.
Wow.
Now, you could see that the members of the council feel a heavy weight of responsibility on their shoulders. Most people in Loudoun County, the factors that affect their life are, I would say, 70% in Loudoun County. The remaining 20-25% may be in the state of Virginia, and the capital is in Richmond. They've never gone to Richmond. Then you're talking about the federal, Washington, D.C., that might as well be another country to them. Loudoun County is where the action is for them, because most things that affect their lives are decided at that level. 70-75% of life in America is decided at the level of local government.
And that's what it should be.
And that's what it should be, at the level of the county. So that was quite an eye-opener for me, and it just strengthened my resolve about why it's important that we devolve powers very seriously. If you look at the current constitution, about 67 items on the exclusive, 68 on the exclusive legislative list. Maybe about 30 are on the concurrent list, and only about 6 are on the residual list, which is births and deaths, marriage, some things, chieftaincy titles, those types of things. I'm the Ifekego of Nnewi Kingdom, so my chieftaincy was not from Abuja, so that I can relate. it was from my traditional ruler in Nnewi, who has the power to confer it on me. But we need a lot more coming down to down to the local government level.
But why? It's obvious because whenever I agree with my friends, I don't know why we tend to miss this as Nigerians. It's obvious that the solution has come from the local governments. The government closest to you is the best government.
Yeah.
No, very few people are ever going to go to Abuja, but at least you know where you live in your local government.
Yes, that's right.
But for I don't know why we always miss it, because even to win the federal level, you have to win your local as well. You have to win the polling units.
Yes.
Those polling booths are located in your local governments. So I don't know why we always try to forget that one and always talk about Abuja.
Exactly.
Forget our states, where our governors are looting.
We use our states as electoral basis, but we don't use them as governance basis.
It makes no sense, because for me the dichotomy is obvious that you need the states to work.
Yes.
For Nigeria to work, Nigeria is the 36 states. Once the statistics are working, Nigeria is working.
Yeah.
So without those statistics working, Nigeria cannot work.
In fact,
everyone should focus on this.
If the 774
local governments
are working, Nigeria is
exactly. And for me, it's as easy as that. But for some reason, every 4 years we go back to Abuja.
Yeah.
But we forget that our governors are very important. Our local government councillors and chairmen and women are very important.
The reason is because of the federal revenue allocation system, which prioritizes the federal government. The minerals, the natural resources are owned by the federal government. I think that should change. The oil in Alaska belongs to Alaska. It doesn't belong to Washington. So the oil anywhere should belong to the state.
Exactly. Yes.
The nickel, the gold, all the solid minerals you can find mostly in northern Nigeria should belong to the areas they have it. Now, if you are not able to develop them responsibly, that's your own problem. You cannot now blame anybody.
Yeah.
You see? So there should be some sort of competitive development that takes place between the regions or the states, if they want to use that model going forward.
I definitely agree.
So we must make Abuja less attractive.
Yes.
And the only way is to take away its sole ownership of natural resources.
Yeah.
So I believe in resource control,
actually,
to use the popular phrase.
Yes, percentage in line with you. Well, you mentioned knowledge economy in your book as well. You talked about it briefly. One of the things that baffled me when I studied in the UK, and I always try to compare and contrast. I'm always doing this in my head, and whenever I write articles as well. Why are things working in UK? Why does it not work in Nigeria?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I answered my question was the lack of critical analysis.
Yes.
So when I was studying in Unizik, Anambra State, so for example, if I read this book, I'll cram this book because I know on the exam day, 1st of September, for example, I have to
pour it out
on first, and then ask me 1 hour after. I won't remember anything in the book, right? But in the UK, my first 2 years I really struggled. I've talked about this before briefly, but I really struggled in my first, because I was doing the same thing I was doing in Nigeria.
Nigeria, terrible.
But I had to change in my second year because I was like, this does not make sense. My essays were not getting good results.
Yes.
But it was mostly focused on essay writing in the UK. I would imagine America as well. Not very few exams, but mostly essay writing.
So
one of the things I came across was, for me to write a good essay, I have to read a lot of books and articles.
Yes.
I have to be critical, I have to analyze. And they always tell us, don't describe, analyze. Break it down, critique it, tell us what you think is wrong about this. Don't tell me, in Nigeria, if the lecturer tells you A, tell him that A is A. Don't tell him why it could be B or C. Just tell him the way he told you to and you pass. But you couldn't do that in the UK. I kind of feel like that foundation of proper education is lacking in Nigeria. And that is why, to a large extent, we are where we are as a country. Because when you think about analysis and being critical, when you look at Nigeria, like we just said, 704 local governments, 36 states. To solve Nigeria, solve the statistics. It's as easy as that. There is no difficulty. There is no miracle. Just solve the statistics, Nigeria becomes great. But for some reason, we are still stuck in going back again to what we talked about, the federal government. So that lack of critical analysis in our universities, in our secondary schools.
I have written about this and spoken about it. And in June, actually, this year, God keeping us alive, I expect to give a major lecture on education policy in Nigeria.
Excellent.
It's called the Athom Banefo Lecture, after the founder, Chief Athom Banefo, Nigeria's former ambassador to the United Nations. Now, the education system is so critical to any nation's greatness. Any nation that is great, go and look at the education system. The education system has built their greatness. So when I say we need to invest a lot more in education, it's part of what I'm talking about. We need to invest in curriculum reform. Yeah. We need to invest in what is called pedagogy, how we learn. Not cram and pour, but critical thinking.
Exactly.
We need to invest a lot more in that.
Yeah.
You know, teaching people how to think, not what to think. Yeah. You see, we need to invest in educational regulation, standards, assessment of schools. We need to look at integrity in the educational exam systems in Nigeria. So we need to look at all these things. We need to invest in teacher pay. How much are teachers paid? In many countries like Finland, for example, and South Korea, which have very world-class leading educational systems, the teaching profession is about the most prestigious, or one of the most prestigious professions. In Nigeria, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it used to be so. If you were a teacher, you really were respected, you know, let alone talk about being a full university professor. I mean, it was like being in the moon. You know, when we were growing up and all that, we looked at professors as gods, you know. And after the central bank, my time at the central bank, I was appointed a professor in one of the premier universities in the United States. And that is the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, where I was also a graduate student. When I came back there as a professor, and I saw some of my professors from 30 years earlier, who were still on the faculty. Yeah. And I was so, you know, I couldn't believe that I was now in faculty meetings with these guys deciding the fate of the university and students when I was once a student, happy to have a conversation with any of them. And now here they are, very happy to welcome me, so proud of the things I've done since they last saw me as a student, and of course leading to my being invited to become a professor on the faculty. So life is like that, you see. So teaching is really very important, you know, because teachers mold young people.
Of course.
And young people mold a nation's future. So education. The educational system in Nigeria needs a complete and total overhaul.
No, I agree.
What you have is everywhere wants to have a university, but it's not quantity, it's quality.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember when talking about this, your experience, I remember when like something they do in the UK, which is one day a week is for lectures, another day is, they call it workshop.
Yeah.
And workshop is just discussing. And I remember my first workshop in Hull, University of Hull.
Yeah.
The lecturer was sat down and we're just talking with him.
Exactly.
We're asking, you couldn't do it in Nigeria. You couldn't ask your... Yeah. You're always afraid to talk to him. But in the UK, it was like he was just sat over there. Yeah. We're asking him questions, just having a debate. Like critical, and it just changed my whole outlook. Like, this is how we should be.
Yes, that's
like
right.
I should be able to walk up to my lecturer and ask him tough questions.
Absolutely.
He will answer you respectfully. Like, you can even call him by his first name.
Absolutely.
But he couldn't do that here. Like, and
it's part of our national culture.
It has to be changed, obviously, for things to work.
It needs to change, you know. Yeah.
No,
we need to be set free in our minds. Yeah.
Definitely agree. I want to talk about this thing that I've seen people like kind of respect in a way argue this point, which is they kind of believe, and I believe wrongly, that the white man is still because of our problems. I remember when the late husband of and the late Queen of England passed away. People were talking about it a lot on Twitter.
Yeah. Okay.
Even people that you think should know better, professors as well. I think one professor got into a debate with Jeff Bezos, the Amazon founder.
Oh yeah, the Nigerian professor.
Yes, the Nigerian professor, the lady.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do we still believe that the white man still controls the black man's destiny? It's obviously not the case. Yes, of course, there are a lot of things we can point to, like slavery and colonialism and all of that, which was wrong. That should never happen.
Absolutely.
But that's in the past, and I believe.
Yes.
And I can point to cases like Rwanda.
Yes.
I can point to some cases of maybe South Africa in a way, African countries that are trying to become great in their own rights. Ethiopia as well.
Yeah. Botswana.
Seychelles.
What is happening with that argument is the dependency theory. It is a way to abdicate agency. It is a way to abdicate responsibility for our own destiny. And I disagree with it profoundly. Yes, I recognize the damaging impact of 3-4 centuries of the transatlantic slave trade, about 4 centuries, actually. I recognize that, and it did a lot of damage. Colonialism, of course, yes. But let me ask you a question. The Asian countries like Malaysia, Singapore, they were also colonized.
Of course.
They may not have been subjected to the transatlantic slavery, but they were colonized, and their resources were raped for the benefit, India, for the benefit of colonial powers. But today, many of those countries are rising. India is rising. Malaysia is rising. Singapore is rising. And so many other countries. So we in Nigeria and in Africa should stop using the excuse or blaming the West for our failures. It's a very easy cop-out,
Yes.
and I just disagree with it. The main reason African countries, including Nigeria, are where they are is the absence of a philosophical worldview. We have become philosophically and intellectually lazy because our leadership and our politics was captured by some ne'er-do-wells. You know, in Nigeria, this happened in the transition in 1999. Because of disappointments over previous transition programs, many people believed that the military was not serious, that they would actually hand over. And so many people who came into the political stage at that time turned out to be gamblers. Some were 419ers, some were. So the wrong people captured the state with our return to democracy. By and large, there were a few exceptions, but by and large, the wrong people. And the trajectory ever since then has been downward towards materialism, nihilism, those kinds of things, anything but deep thinking about our state, about our reality, and about how to change it. As a man thinketh, so is he. So we have to, when you think in Nigeria today, when you think deeply, when you express yourself through the concepts, and their ideas, it's called blowing grammar. They call it blowing grammar. We want the practical.
Yeah.
But they don't understand that there is no practical thing that wasn't based on a sound concept and a sound idea. So that's, we must return to that level of depth before we can find our way forward.
Yeah. How do we do it, Prof? How do we wrest power away from these people who have raped Nigeria and destroyed this country? Like, what's step by step? I mean, you talk about, one of the things I love about this book is you talk about strategies in this book a lot, being strategic, and I think that's one of the things that is lacking in our politics and in our country.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what steps, if you had to create a to-do list, right? Yeah. So someone came to you and said, give us a to-do list of what we should do in the next 20 years to rescue Nigeria.
Part of the problem with answering that question is because it goes back to who you elect as your leaders. The educational system of a country is not determined by citizens. It's determined by the government. So if you have the wrong people in government, you cannot change it. You can establish all the private schools you like, but how many people will afford to go to the private schools? It's about the quality of education of the public schools. That's what matters. And that's decided by government officials. Now, so if you when you look at the people themselves in our own country, they are part of the problem. Because poverty, hunger, joblessness. So people have become commoditized, and those hunger and joblessness have become weaponized for politics. And so when people get crumbs, they're grateful, and then they go and vote for who is giving them the crumbs. Yeah. And so the people themselves are a major problem of Nigeria. It's not just the political class. A lot of things have happened in this country that if 1/4 of those things were to happen in other countries, the citizens will be out in the streets.
100%.
But Nigerian citizens have learned to be cowards, complete cowards. They're so laid back. They don't, they made an attempt in the 2023 election, those kinds of things, and with NSAS, but you saw how they were gunned down, and they went quickly back into their shell, But there's no realization that if 1 million people, 2 million people across the country move on the street, how many of them can you shoot?
Exactly.
So that tactics of shooting everybody works because there's still too few that are able and willing to risk it. If 1 million people take to the streets in this country on any issue, the state will retreat
100%, yes.
and go and check what are these people protesting about. Can we do something about it?
I agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
but
And there's something that happens
Yeah.
to a country's consciousness, the people that live in that country when you protest.
Yeah.
I believe in civil disobedience. And when I
it
read about
happens in every country, and every
how
politician is afraid of it.
Exactly. How UK came to be what UK is, the glorious revolution.
Yes.
The protests.
Yes.
These are the things that made these countries what they are. The fact that
Exactly.
citizens are involved all
yes,
the time.
all the time.
They don't take a back to that, like, we want this to happen, and you will make it happen as our leader. If you don't want, we're going to remove you and put someone else in. That's how it happens in all the developed countries. But in Africa, it's like, we've just moved our agency and be like, just go, anything you want to do.
Yeah.
And the leaders, they know that we're not smart enough to oppose them. We can't organize, we can't mobilize.
That's why we're where we are, and it continues, because the leaders know that the people are weak.
Exactly.
And they can continue to ride over them with money, with a few drops from the table, and people will just calm down and things like that. So that's the reason.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears, Prof, and talk about economic policy.
Absolutely.
You served as the deputy governor of the CBN.
Yes.
Impressive tenure when you were there. I think you served under
Sanusi.
Erufa. Sanusi.
As governor of the bank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the things, for the past few years now, the exchange rate has been fluctuating. One day is $1,000 to 1 naira.
Yeah.
Currently, it's at £2,000 to 1 naira. So if you make £1,000, you're a millionaire. 2 million naira.
Yeah.
That's what it is in Nigeria. How did we get here, number one? And do you think why do you think the exchange rate is high, number one? How did we get here? And do you think it's something that, can the exchange rate be a good measurement of Nigeria's economy? Like, is that a good way to measure how good we are doing as a country? Or is it just numbers we throw around? No. Is this a good way to measure?
The exchange rate is not a good way to measure. Because the exchange rate, even though in the case of Nigeria right now, the naira is undervalued, no question about it. But the exchange rate generally depends on a number of factors on how it's managed. Is it a pegged exchange rate? That is to say, has that country consciously decided to peg its currency to another currency, like maybe the US dollar or the euro or whatever, and do they have enough foreign reserves to manage that peg relationship? So it's an artificial relationship. And sometimes the country does not have full control over its monetary policy. That's why you have the CFA, the CFA, in the Francophone West African countries, tends to be stable because their currencies are pegged to the euro. But they're overvalued, not undervalued. They're overvalued. What does that do? It makes imports very cheap. And that's why those countries import a lot from France. It works for France very well. Okay. Not necessarily for those countries. But because we are not economically literate, we see strong currencies as evidence of economic success. Not necessarily. Because some countries competitively devalue their currency so that their exports are cheaper for those who are buying it, and therefore they get a lot more foreign exchange. So the naira exchange rate is not the problem with Nigeria. It is a reflection of the problem with Nigeria. And that problem is we don't have a productive economy that is diversified and exports diversified complex products that earn forex. The only thing that we export to a large extent, 80% of our export revenues, is oil. And that now has problems. First of all, we're not making as much money as we used to. Secondly, our production is not where it should be. Thirdly, there's a lot of oil theft. Fifth, the price of the oil market goes up and down. So we have no control over it. So for you to depend on that one commodity for your main source of forex is dangerous. And we are paying the price of that being the case for the past 40, 45, 50 years. That's what's happening in Nigeria today, because we no longer have enough foreign reserves to determine the value of our currencies to be strong. It is the foreign reserves that underpin the value of our legal tender, because we are not exporting diversified products.
So essentially what you're saying, sir, is let me just break this down to a way someone
Oh,
that
sure.
doesn't know much about
Economics
will understand this. So
Yeah.
a 5-year-old or to a 10-year-old is
Absolutely.
that don't worry about the high exchange rates.
Yes.
Worry about producing.
Worry about having light, electricity 24 hours
Yes.
a day in Nigeria. Worry about moving from 4,000 megawatts to 30, 40,000 megawatts. You will see what will happen. It will be like a miracle because production will massively increase. A lot of manufacturing will increase. A lot of people will be employed gainfully, and a lot of products will be manufactured for export, and it will be priced competitively. Because if you're spending 50% of the cost of your product is the cost of your diesel or petrol running your generator, then your products will be very expensive and they'll be uncompetitive in the market internationally. That's the real problem we're having. And that's where we should go and focus on. But we fixate on the exchange rate because we are an import-dependent economy. So the exchange rate is the passage through which the price of goods is determined.
Yes.
And that's what causes a lot of inflation.
Yes.
Together with other factors like the printing of 30 trillion naira by the central bank to finance the budget deficit of the federal government.
Yes, and because
over years.
Yes, and because we import, that's why you go to the supermarket today, it's 100 naira.
Exactly, tomorrow is 200. Because there's no stability in the exchange rate.
Yes.
If there was stability, it's not just that it has devalued or collapsed, it is that there was no stability. So until that stability is established and it's within a certain band, then you will see some price stability.
Yeah.
So this is what is going on. You know, we're in a big era of very high inflation, and that's caused by the exchange rate problem because of a lot of things are imported. So they will always reflect the market, the price in the market will reflect the price at which that thing was imported. And that is determined by the exchange rate. So that's the breakdown of it all.
No, that makes sense. And
Yes.
you mentioned printing money.
Yes.
I know I'm going to ask you this question because regardless,
Yes.
I know you don't want to talk about politics, but
Yes.
I'm going to let you navigate the answer. I think where the water began going down the drain
Yes.
in a massive way was during Buhari's time.
Oh, definitely.
And under Godwin Emefiele, the former
Definitely.
CBN governor.
CBN governor, yes.
The amount of money that was printed, the fact you had, I don't know if you saw the video of Bode George talking about how the CBA became like a personal bank.
Okay.
People could approach, he said this himself, not me.
Okay.
I think it's a real video, wasn't doctored. What do you think of Emefiele's tenure? Because I think that's when the stuff began happening.
What I think of Godwin Emefiele's tenure as governor of the central bank is a matter of public knowledge. I mean, I've been very clear that his tenure was a complete, unmitigated disaster for the Nigerian economy because he surrendered the independence of the central bank to the politicians. And they would say jump, and he would say how high. That's not central banking. And that's why the economy, that's a very important reason why the economy is in a mess today. So when they could no longer, they were making budgets that they could not finance. That's what a budget deficit is.
Yes.
So you are spending more than you're earning. So how do you plug the hole? It's either you borrow or the central bank, and you can borrow from the central bank. So now they over-borrowed beyond the legal limits. And so it was basically a money printing exercise for them for 10 years. They were borrowing externally and they were borrowing from the central bank massively. And this created massive naira liquidity. So there's too much money around, and that's one of the reasons there's a lot of inflation. When you combine that with the foreign exchange problem, then you have a toxic mix, of inflation, hyperinflation as we have it now.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible how, like, when I see how he was a tool for Buhari and for Buhari's cohort, the cabal around Buhari.
He was an absolute houseboy. That's all he was. He wasn't a real central bank governor. You know, it was for political cabals. And he might have thought he was benefiting or would benefit from serving their interests. And that became obvious when he now tried to run for president from the office without even resigning. So much of impunity had been created in his head and by the people who were supposedly his backers, that he could actually contemplate of such an illegality.
The hubris.
And the hubris and the distaste. It was unbelievable that a central bank is, we want to go from there to be a candidate in an election without resigning. Obviously, it's against the law, but who held him to account?
Yeah.
Nobody, because the government of the day, they were his, they were all in it together.
Of course.
They were paddy. Yeah.
I mean, I remember the video of when he was taking on Abuki FX, and I remember that video and how the tables have turned.
Yes. First of all, even the taking on, it's just trying to use a sledgehammer to kill an ant. Who is Abuki FX? That a central bank governor should devote time on the media to be talking about and challenging him to a fight.
All he does is just publish figures, and people see what figures he publishes.
That just tells
it has no
you
impact on economic policy or monetary policy.
Yeah, just people chasing shadows.
Exactly.
Chasing shadows.
So I'm so grateful you talked about this. Let's briefly touch on insecurity in the Southeast.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, this happened in Delta. Delta is Southeast.
Yes.
Few days ago, about 20-something or so soldiers were killed.
Yes.
We don't know what happened, why they were killed yet. There's going to be an investigation that will be carried out. But that's one case, that's one story. There are numerous stories we can talk about in Anambra State, in Enugu State, kidnappings going on.
Yeah.
This breakdown of law and order we are seeing.
Yes.
For me, I believe that, and I think we've talked about this, you have to fight fire with fire. If it means hiring people from outside the country to come into the country, private security force. I think you've talked about it in one of your interviews on Media Channels. There
was a time I called for Nigeria to hire mercenaries to fight banditry and terrorists.
Yeah. And again,
because it's clear that the military, despite their best efforts, have not been able to. Yeah.
And again, I keep going back to this question I asked you before. The leaders, they know this is the solution. They know that the military, for whatever reason, they can't do the job.
Yeah.
It's obvious they can do it. And I always think about this idea of in the 21st century where you have intelligence capabilities that we haven't had before in the world.
Exactly.
America can stay in the Pentagon and direct a war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
They can stay in America and direct a war in Gaza. You don't even need to be on ground. You're thousands of miles away, and you're directing a war in another country.
Yeah.
How come we still can't solve insecurity in Nigeria? How come we can't fly balloons in the air? How come we can't tap into these guys' phones?
No, the problem of insecurity is a problem of two things. One, a problem of political will. Two, a problem of corruption. The insecurity has become the insecurity, complex. It has become a business complex for many people in the security sphere. They're making money from it. Withdrawing huge amounts of money from Nigeria's budget and extra budgetary resources. And so if the security problem is solved, they stop getting rich. So that's number one. Number two is that there's parts of Nigeria's political leadership elite are aligned with the forces that are creating the terror. And so for their own selfish reasons, they are not able to turn against those forces, and so that is just the problem. I mean, it's just the problem. Yeah. Many people, you've heard allegations that some of these people were mercenaries who were imported in Nigeria. When they say Fulani headsmen and Fulani this, Fulani that, most of those people, some of them may be Fulani, but they're not Nigerians because they don't speak Hausa. People who have encountered them, many of them will speak French, corrupted forms of French. So that these are really foreign elements who have either migrated into the country or were imported into the country. Yeah.
No, I definitely agree, sir. I want us to take a bird's eye view, Prof, and look at the world. Yes. Or the world stage. I would believe you would agree with me that we live in a multipolar world now. We used to live in a bipolar world when it was the Soviet Union and America.
Yeah.
Now and then the Berlin Wall, exactly. The Berlin Wall falls. America becomes a unipolar world power. Yes. Can do anything she wants to do. Go to Libya, kill Gaddafi. Go to Iraq, kill Saddam Hussein. Yeah. Literally anything she wanted to do, she could do. America. Now we live in a world where you don't just have America. You have Russia. You have China.
You have China. Yeah.
How do you think that affects Africa? You talked about one of the things again. I keep going back to this book. Is you talk about worldviews.
Yes.
How do you think this multipolarity we see today affects Africa? Because one of the things that I was happy about to see when Tinubu became president was a journalist asked him, because when he won the election, France congratulated him immediately. The UK sent their congrats immediately. But the Americans were not quick to congratulate him.
Okay.
They kind of waited. And normally that's a bad sign, right? America is not supporting you. America didn't congratulate you on your victory. And a journalist asked him, what kind of, I'm just paraphrasing, why? And he was like, if the Americans don't support me, I'll go to China. No African president would have said that 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Like, you would never dare to say, if America does not support me, I'll go to Russia or I'll go to China. But now Tinubu himself is saying that. So that means that there's been a shift in the thinking of world leaders that even if America hates you, you could approach China, you could approach Russia. And the Chinese are ever willing to help.
Of course.
The Russians more so.
Of course.
You know, so how can we, how do you think it affects Africa? And then number two, how can we take advantage? Because for me, I think our leaders can take advantage of this.
Yeah.
Because take, for example, insecurity.
Yeah.
If for whatever reason the Americans don't want to support, maybe because of NSAS or whatever, you could approach the Chinese to help you in insecurity. You could approach the Russians to help you with insecurity.
You could approach Israel.
You could approach Israel, exactly. You know, so how do you think it affects Africa, and how do you think we can take advantage of it?
Well, I think African countries can take advantage of the multipolar world by thinking first of what is their strategic interest. And the strategic interest includes a careful examination of the balance of power in the world. And, you know, understanding what are the benefits we have if we go this way, what are the costs we pay if we go this way. There are people who can challenge, even though America is the dominant global power, there are people who have aligned themselves more with the BRICS, you know, the BRIC powers and so on and so forth, which is trying to counterbalance the dominance of the US dollar and things like that. But before you do that, you have to take a careful analysis of what the benefits are for you so that you as a country are not jumping from frying pan to fire. You see? Yeah, and that's one of the things that I regret in the policy universe in Nigeria. There's not a lot of deep thinking. There's a lot of flourish, there's a lot of promise, but there isn't a lot of substance. There isn't a lot of knowledge and understanding of the deeper driving forces of either economic transformation or of international relations. As used to be the case long ago, Nigeria was a clear middle power in the 70s and the 80s. We were a medium power. You know, today we are not, you know, I mean, in reality, we have to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
So yes, Nigeria must not necessarily be tied to the US, but they also can maneuver their relationship with the US to get a lot more benefit than they have, or their relationship with China, or their relationship with Russia. They just haven't done enough of that. Focus on the self-interest.
If Tinubu were to call
The
you,
national interest.
Tinubu were to call you and tell you to advise him on what to do, how to achieve that, what would you tell him?
If he pays me enough, I can advise him. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about
as a consultant.
Exactly. Yeah. Talking about the world stage.
Yes.
We have two wars going on: the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza.
Yes.
I know it doesn't concern Africa directly, but obviously indirectly these wars have a way of monetary policy as well, reliance on the dollar.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on these two wars? Whether it's the one in Gaza or the one in Ukraine?
They are bad. That's number one. Bad for the global economy. And in the Ukraine, it affects us because a lot of wheat comes from Ukraine, Russia, that axis. So it affects our economy also in terms of costs. That is number one. Number two, you know, it affects us because these things affect the price of oil, whether it's Gaza, Ukraine, because the Middle East countries that produce oil are also. So if it escalates and continues to widen, you know, it will hit us one way or the other. So that's one. Number two is that the war in Ukraine, there is no option but for Ukraine to fight for its survival. Ukraine cannot allow Russia to take it over. Ukraine is a proper republic. The Soviet Union disintegrated. That's a historical fact, and it's a legal fact. So they are a country of their own. So if you try to invade them, they're bound to try to, you know. So, but we hope, my hope, is that at some point, Putin will be made to realize that the cost of continuing on this is too much for Russia, and they can find a face-saving way to negotiate their way out of continuing that war. Coming to Gaza, it's the same thing. It's going to be, first of all, the attack of October 7 on Israel was massive and was horrific. You don't attack a state like Israel, which is living in the midst of very hostile neighbors that have attacked it several times since 1948. Every war that has been fought in the Middle East has been fought because of an attack on Israel, not an attack by Israel. Some people are losing sight of this fact. They're losing sight of this fact because they are moved emotionally by the killings of civilians in Gaza. But the civilians are being killed because Hamas is using them as a human shield, which is totally cynical and wicked. But Israel, of course, needs to rein itself in because there are too many civilian casualties, and I think it should simply make sure it protects itself. I don't think it can militarily destroy Hamas. But clearly, they have already, and they must now begin to think longer term about a two-state solution. There must be a two-state solution.
They're not willing to think about it.
Well, that's the current leader. Yeah. But he will not be there forever.
Yeah, Netanyahu, yes.
Netanyahu will not be there forever. Yes. So it's just a current position. But who knows what another Israeli prime minister might think. Yeah. You see? So that's the point.
Going back to Ukraine, what do you think about those who point to the facts, who point to the Monroe Doctrine?
Yeah.
World powers should stick to their sphere of influence. Yes. America sticks to your sphere of influence. Allow Russia to stick to their own sphere of influence. Yes. That's essentially the Monroe Doctrine in layman terms, right? Sure. You talk about the fact that NATO, which is essentially America, the American bastion of power, is moving closer and closer to Russia's borders.
Yes.
And I think it's a good argument to make that, listen, you're trying to put your missiles on our border. You already have a missile probably in Poland. Not probably, they do have a missile in Poland, missile systems in Poland, which, yes, they claim to be defensive, but as you well know, they can also be offensive as well.
Yeah.
And you're trying to absorb Ukraine into NATO. You've talked about absorbing Georgia into NATO as well. And I think it's a good argument that making that you can't keep on pushing your power on our sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. The Chinese are also making the same case as well when it comes to Taiwan, when it comes to Hong Kong. In fact, they've already taken Hong Kong, so that's fine, but I'm talking of Taiwan now. Yeah. And I think it's a good case to make that because of America's need for war, it's as if the American establishment, not really the American people, the establishment, there is this drive, let's always go to war. And this is one of the reasons why I love Trump. The fact that in his 4 years, whatever you think of Trump, the fact remains that in his 4 years of being in office, there was no new war. They always told us before his election that, Trump will bring World War III. Funny enough, nothing happened. There was calm and peace. But now with Biden, a so-called liberal, a so-called Democrat, there are wars everywhere. There is panic everywhere. But I think this argument of the Monroe Doctrine, I think is a viable argument. It's a good case to be made.
In international relations, we have what is called the anarchical society. My doctorate was in international relations. And you have the anarchical society in which member countries pursue their interests.
That's realism, right?
Realism, essentially. Realism, it's a soft form of realism.
Yes.
And it was adumbrated very clearly by Hedley Bull at the University of Oxford, on other writers, So I loved Hedley Bull. And in fact, my doctoral dissertation, I read The Anarchical Society, his book, A Study of Order in World Politics.
Okay.
I would recommend that book to you.
Because
it really does explain, to me, the international system very clearly. After reading that book, it was only a matter of time before I left my career in the UN.
Yes, because I read you left the UN to start up with Sogato Strategies.
I've been in the UN for about 17 years. But, when I read the Anarchical Society, it's like a light bulb opened in my eyes. And I understood the different epochs, the international system in which countries were very independent, related to one another, but were not too joined at the hip. Then the international society, where countries now collaborate through international organizations, but at the same time, they're all pursuing their own vested interests through those international organizations. So it's a controlled form of anarchy. And then there is the international community, which is an aspiration that has not yet been achieved, where we are supposed to be our brother's keepers. But nobody is keeping his brother's things, as we can see. Yeah. So from that perspective, I can understand the Monroe Doctrine. I can understand Russia's uneasiness with NATO coming to its borders. Yes. But these are independent countries, and they're making free choices. So NATO is not coming into Russian territory. You see? So again, this is another way to look at it. Yeah. But of course, from a practical point of view, it weakens Russia's influence from their perspective. The closer NATO is to their direct borders. Of course. So in that sense, that's why, and even the NATO people understand this, that's why they did not press on with the matter of Ukraine becoming a NATO member.
They did. I mean, you had Kamala Harris go to.
No, I know they've walked back on it. I know they've walked.
I mean, they're talking about it. The current NATO
I don't think
General.
It's not going to happen.
No, it's not. I mean, I agree, but that goes to my question,
because if it happens, Russia will then remain in that war till thy kingdom comes.
Exactly. But that goes to my question. Yeah. They know what you're saying is correct. Yes. They know this, that of course Russia will fight to its death.
Yes.
To prevent Ukraine from becoming a NATO member.
Yes.
But why do you have the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg? I'm not messing up his name. No, why do you have Kamala Harris? Why do you have Biden? Why do you have the establishment, whether it's Republican or Democrats, still pushing this war?
Yes.
Because it's obvious that Russia will not, they not agree, if I'm to use that word. They won't agree.
Yes.
They won't agree for anybody, like in this scenario.
Yes.
Putin has talked about this is life and death for his country.
Yes.
But yet they want, and they might.
I think they're counting on post-Putin Russia.
But Putin is not going to die anytime soon. I mean, we're not God, but
I don't know. I cannot go into that level of speculation.
Exactly, but the point is he's going to be there he just won re-election yesterday. Sure. He's going to be there for a long time. And the point is this, even if Putin were to go, how sure are you the person that's going to come after Putin is going to be amenable to your...
Amenable to, Anyway, but this is the push and shove of world politics. Yeah. And for me, I'm a bit neutral in it. Countries push their own national interest. Yes. If I were Nigeria, I'd be pushing my own country's national interest. Period. I don't believe in the godfatherism of Nigerian foreign policy. Nigeria needs to begin to look at what its interest is in world politics. And that's one of the reasons why, to their credit, they did not take any side in these wars. They haven't taken any side in the war in Gaza. They have not sided with Palestine. They have not sided with Israel. And that is, I think, wise.
What do you think of South Africa, though? Because, I mean, for them to do what they did in the ICJ,
it's a bold thing,
massive.
But it's also a political statement, because it's a political statement for several reasons unique to their own history.
Yeah. Apartheid
and the relative stand of Israel and all that. So they're pursuing their own national interest as well. They may pay a price for it. I mean, recently, South Africa lost out on chairing the UN Human Rights Council because, of course, the Western countries said to hell with you. But I think South Africa is in a place where it could do what it did.
Exactly.
There was no other African country that could do that. Exactly. Not even Nigeria.
I agree.
That could have gone to the ICJ to file a case against Israel.
And I think that's a good thing, because we live in the multipolar world, like I said, even though America could rebuff them, they could go to China.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's the beauty, and
they're part of the BRICS.
Exactly. That's what I love about this multipolar world we live in, that the American unipolarity, in my opinion, was bad for the world. What America did in Libya was ridiculous, was so dangerous that when Gaddafi was there, say what's one about Gaddafi, he was a bad man, he was an evil man, but at least Libya was still a working country. But look at Libya today.
I'm not anti-American.
No, I'm not as well. Okay. But I'm looking at it from a...
I'm just pro-Nigerian.
No, me too, I agree. I agree. And also pro-African as well, because Libya is an African country.
Yes, that's right.
And the spillover from Libya led to insecurity.
Of course.
I would suggest you agree to.
Absolutely.
So America's removal of Gaddafi led to insecurity in Africa, in my country, in your country.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a good thing that we have this multipolarity down where...
Certainly.
China is kind of like a bulwark against America's dominance, which is a great thing.
I think it's interesting. That's what I would say.
The last topic for today is just Rwanda. You wrote a book on Rwanda. I tried to finding the book, but I couldn't find it. I only got this one, but I'm looking forward to finding and reading that book. Rwanda is a case study of a country that went through their history in 1994, the genocide, where almost 800,000 people were killed. Look at Rwanda today under Kagame. Incredible country, beautiful country. The country is working. So I think it tells me the story of you can be where Nigeria is today, but if you have a great leader,
yes, you can
things can change. So
Absolutely.
what are your thoughts on, I mean, like I said, I've not read the book, but what are your thoughts on the genocide? What are your thoughts on Rwanda today?
Well, first of all, I have a very personal relationship with Rwanda. Professional, but personal. I was political desk officer for Rwanda in the UN Peacekeeping Department's headquarters in New York when the genocide happened. I was working with Kofi Annan, who was then the Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping in the UN. He later became the Secretary General. So therefore, I was very much involved in the effort to backstop the UN humanitarian operations, the UN peacekeeping operation, and all of that. The Rwandan genocide was a huge tragedy. Those who understand Rwandan history will understand why it happened, because it wasn't actually even the first time. There was a smaller type of genocide that had taken place in 1959. And that led to a massive exodus of many Tutsi families because Rwanda has three major ethnic groups. The Hutu, who make up the majority, about 80%, the Tutsi, who make up about 15%, and the Twa, the Pygmy Twa tribe, which makes up about 5%. So, when the Belgians left, when the Belgians empowered, the Tutsis became the kings of Rwanda about 4 or 5 centuries ago. And they worked with the Belgians as a colonial power. But for some internal dynamics, the tide turned. The Belgians handed over power, not to the Tutsi, but to the Hutu, when they were living as a colonial power. And the Hutu now decided to revenge all the centuries of all this, So anyway, there was some sort of uprising, and a lot of Tutsis ran away from Rwanda into Uganda and neighboring countries. Kagame was one of those young children, I believe about 3 or 4 years, and the story is that his mother carried him on his back into Uganda, and many other families. So they grew up in Uganda, became Ugandan citizens, joined the Ugandan army, and he was director of military intelligence in the Ugandan army under Yoweri Museveni. And they fought the war that brought Yoweri Museveni to power in 1986. Nevertheless, because they were not natural Ugandans, there was a lot of discrimination against them inside Uganda. And so they decided that they would have to return to the country of their birth. But there was no way you were going to return without war, because the Hutus were not going to give up. So they started military operations across the border, and that's why the Tutsis were called Inyenzi, cockroach. Oh. They would strike at night and withdraw. So it was like more of a guerrilla warfare at the beginning. Eventually it became a more conventional warfare, and a real full war began with Kagame and controlling the army because they just decided that they must take power in Rwanda by force. And that's what happened. So despite several negotiations, there was the Arusha Accords about how the government would be shared and all that, but Kagame did not really stick to that accord. He just kept pushing militarily until he won total victory. What was the price of total victory? Genocide. Because that attempt at total victory got the Hutu extremists mad, and they decided that there had to be a final solution, quote unquote, and we're going to wipe out these guys. And that's how the genocide was planned and executed. Now, later on, in my career in the UN, when I left New York, I later went to the International War Crimes Tribunal, the International Tribunal for Rwanda. And I was a legal advisor there and the spokesman for the tribunal, because that tribunal now prosecuted the architects of the Rwanda genocide, including Jean Kambanda, who was the prime minister, and various other high-ranking figures. Theonest Bagosora was a very important figure in the army. Eventually, later on, Felicien Kabuga, who was the business mastermind, who was purchasing weapons that were cutlasses that were used, and who ran Radio Mille Collines, the radio that was used to demonize the Tutsi before and during the genocide, and radicalized people, and radicalized the Interahamwe gangs that did most of the killing. Interahamwe means those who work together. You know? So, but of course, working in this sense was in a bad way. Yeah. So they killed these people within 90 days. And so, you know, but as they were doing it, which now even made Kagame and his troops more desperate to take power militarily, because they felt that now that was the only way the Tutsi could survive. They couldn't survive if they were not in charge. But they won the war militarily and took power. At first, the president was, forgotten his name, he was a Hutu, and Kagame was the vice president. But that was just a ceremonial arrangement. Eventually, they pushed him aside, and Kagame took power after about 7 years. And so Kagame, as I see him, is a visionary person, is not a great respecter of human rights. I think we have to be honest about that.
Yes.
He's more in the model of the Asian political, power.
School of thought.
School of thought. People like Lee Kuan Yew. And,
Singapore.
So it's a controlled democracy. It's like maybe one party will be dominant, but we have a development vision and we pursue it for 30, 40 years. So that's the kind of thing he's doing in Rwanda. But regardless of whatever criticisms we might have about lapses or, insufficient protections of human rights, their own worldview. See, Kagame is one of the few African leaders that have a worldview. The worldview is a Chinese kind of worldview, that order and stability come before everything else. Yeah. The Chinese worldview is not the Western worldview. The Western worldview was built on innovation,
economic prosperity,
human rights, and institutions. The Chinese worldview was built on an endless view of time, which is very, very philosophical concept, stability, and order, and the community being more important than the individual. So the concept of human rights in China is not the Western concept. They have a communal concept, and that's what Kagame has, and that's actually what we have in most African societies, that the community is more important than the individual. So when Kagame came, this is the model he has followed. And so he wants Rwanda to be stable, and he knows that if everybody has the Western concept of human rights, first of all, the Tutsis will be overrun once again. And there may be radicals who may want to try another genocide. So he does not allow that. The price is that development is being driven, at least in the view of the world, that they're doing well. Yeah. I talked to a Rwandan, one Rwandan, when I met long ago in New York. She was of a very different school of thought. Yeah, but that's life. People will agree and disagree.
Yeah. My fear is that not necessarily that I'm afraid, or is that
the test for Kagame and his model is that he will be president pretty much for life, but what happens when he's no longer?
I was going to say that.
That's when we will know whether the Rwandan model has worked or whether it will unravel.
Exactly.
That's
the issue with these kinds of leaderships, is that when this visionary leader goes, who replaces him?
Exactly.
Like, how do you?
But in Singapore,
yeah,
they managed to. I think Lee Kuan Yew's son eventually became at some point. In Botswana, they have also a very good leadership succession system where whoever, since 1966, that Botswana became independent, whoever was the vice president always became the president after the president finished this. So it's been very orderly and has gone fairly well. Maybe there's a deliberate focus that we need to put on leadership succession in Africa that we're not doing. They do it in corporations, succession planning, in companies, things like that. Yeah. But we don't do it in our politics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Prof, thank you so much for this. I don't know if there's any other topic you want to cover. Is there anything you have to get off your chest? Is there anything that you want to talk about we've not talked about? Because I really enjoyed this. This was beautiful.
Thank you very much.
I'm honored, sir, to be here with you. I've always looked up to you. I love intellectuals. I love having intellectual debates and conversations because I feel this lacking in Nigeria. Yeah. And I feel like there's a yearning for that.
Which is very strange because Nigeria used to be a country of intellectuals. I mean, think about the 50s, think about the 60s, think about even the 70s, think about the Wole Soyinkas, the Chinua Nobel laureate, think about the Chinua Achebes, think about Pius Okibo, the economist.
I mean, imagine
Think
speaking
about-
to these guys today. Imagine speaking to them.
Today, because of our political misadventure, the worst rule the best. And that's sad.
Prof, I can't recommend this book enough. Imagine Africa. I'm gonna put in the link.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna look on Amazon again, and hopefully the one on Rwanda, the book you wrote, is out, because I can't wait to read it as well.
It was an examination of the politics of the search for justice.
Yeah, because I've always wanted to read a book that's seminal on Rwanda. I wanted to read yours.
Yes.
So I'm like,
you'll get it.
Yes, I want to read a book that will give me a proper view of what happened.
What happened?
Yeah, because I can't wait to understand what really happened.
Yes, exactly.
And I believe that book will help a lot. But this one alone is something else. When you talked about the book Heli Bull, what it had, the impact it had on, that's the same impact this had on me as well.
Okay, that's very good. Yeah.
It talks about everything you need to know, and it talks about what I believe in, which is the best. Go for the best economic transformation, which is what I believe in. If you come to Anambra today and come back 10 years after, Anambra should not look the same way. Same in Enugu State. Enugu State today should not look the same way 10 years from now. It should be different. Just like in
there
UK.
Should be progress.
I said if you went to Swansea today and came back to Swansea 10 years from now, it would be very different, because development is happening, things are changing. And I can't recommend this book enough, and I can't thank you enough for answering my call, answering my messages, and for someone of your stature to do this. I'm so grateful, sir. Thank you for doing this.
I'm glad.
Thank you so much for the time, sir.
No problem.
Thank you so much.
Very good. All right, Noble.